This is a TECNO Phantom X2 Pro, and this is basically what you get when TECNO tries to put in all the best they currently have into a smartphone. And of course, I've been using this smartphone for about 2 weeks now. For me, the Phantom line has always been the best design TECNO has had to offer, especially from the predecessor, the Phantom X from 2 years ago. And I like them slim and beautiful. This maintains that same consistent design for this lineup. It is a really tall form factor, which is not as wide as most smartphones on the market right now, making it quite easy to have a full grip of the smartphone. In fact, the curves on the smartphone feels like this is designed with your hand in mind. The back has a simple yet catchy look. Maybe not everyone likes this bold camera statement that happens here, but there is no denying the fact that this does grab attention. And besides having the aluminum frame, they have swapped out the glossy glass finish from the predecessor to a matte-like leather-like one to avoid fingerprints and get you a better grip with this smartphone. Even though this might look and feel premium, and I absolutely love this design, who doesn't like the car-like fitting finish on the smartphone? One might argue that this would heavily attract stain considering the bright orange color on the rear of the smartphone. I also hear that there are 2 other color variants out there, but the good thing here is that the box gives you this case to protect and cover the Mars orange color you have here. That's what it's called. And also you get a Stardust Grey color which you can purchase out there. This case also doubles as a kickstand for the Phantom X2 Pro, meaning you can use it in different positions with the smartphone, and I love it. Back to the phone itself, the rear looks solid with a clean phantom text and nothing busy going on at the rear. The camera on the other hand has this large eye looking circles, which I didn't originally like from the renders I saw online until I had this phone in my hand. I think this design might have grown on me basically, and I have nothing to complain about this camera arrangement. Trust me, this isn't as bad as it seems right now. Just go into a smartphone store and get a hold of this device to see for yourself. The camera bump design and protrusion means, first off, you are going to get a wobbly smartphone on a table, and also throwing on the case doesn't eliminate the wobble either. And secondly, it has this shiny material for the camera, making it a fingerprint magnet at that point and a little harder to clean when it gets a little dirty with dust. All thanks to the multiple camera bump that would trap dust. Other aspects remain the same. You have this dual SIM tray at the bottom, a mouthpiece opening which complements the one at the top for your microphones. You have USB Type-C ports at the bottom also, and a single down-firing speaker opening. Also, the vibration motors on the smartphone feels like something you get from the Samsung Galaxy A series. You know, that jiggly type of vibration, and not the knock type you get from the top-tier flagship devices. When you move over to the front side of the smartphone, which is basically the display, you get the familiar side, basically the same slab of glass or display you'd see on most smartphones as far as design goes. It has a Gorilla Glass Victus protection also. It is an LED panel with a centered punch hole cutout notch for the front-facing camera. The resolution on here is Full HD+, and even though this might not have the extreme levels of brightness like the competition out there, about 500 nits of brightness is what you get for this smartphone, and it does the job for outdoor use. While I think this is a good panel and an improvement for TECNO, I don't think this is something you haven't seen before. Especially considering the price range of the Phantom X2 Pro, this is basically normal. If you've noticed by now, this is a curved display, meaning the display wraps to the corners of the smartphone. I've always been a fan of this kind of displays, and I don't see any reason to dislike this kind of technology. I can understand people's frustration with curved displays, saying you'd have accidental touches or warped content viewing at those edges. While this is true, and even the content displayed at the curved seems a little bit less bright than the center of the display, but this isn't something that's a huge problem for me personally. One reason I love this kind of displays is because whenever you try to use the back navigation gesture on curved displays, it gives you this feeling like you're actually hitting a physical button because of that curve at the corner. The bezels at the top and bottom chin of the smartphone's display are almost same. Of course, I can see the slightly larger chin bezel, but they are quite tiny, giving the X2 Pro a more premium look for the front. 120Hz refresh rate for the Phantom this year, and so you should expect fluid animations while scrolling through menus, and also you get some of the best refresh rates while gaming, especially when paired with the processor on this device. You have the option to set the refresh rate to adjust automatically or stay stuck to 120Hz, which isn't something I would advise you do, considering the fact that that won't save you a lot of battery. While still on this display, I might as well cover the fingerprint scanner which is found at the lower center of this display. I love the unlock animation that goes on here, of course, but this is not the fastest there is out there. And one thing I would say I dislike about the fingerprint scanner placement is how far down it is. It always feels like I'm going to drop a smartphone when I see the in-display scanner placed almost at the bottom of that display. I think the better positioning for this would have been something higher just by a tad bit, and that means you wouldn't have to stretch your hand downwards and risk dropping your smartphone. But all in all, you get used to this placement eventually. So, like I mentioned, I've been using the smartphone for about 2 weeks now as my daily driver with my SIM in it. By the way, you have a dual SIM tray configuration on the smartphone with no means of expanding the internal memory. So, all my mobile computing tasks, gaming, chats and everything you can imagine have been done with the smartphone, and man does it fly. The processor on the Phantom X2 Pro 5G is the Dimensity 9000 of 4nm architecture. You have 12 gigs of RAM, which can go up to 17 gigs of RAM using memory fusion, and a 256 gigs of internal storage for this device. Now, enough of the whole jargon here. All I mean to say is that this has a processing power and speed comparable to that on the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 4. In fact, in terms of the raw CPU performance, this processor is measurably better than, say, the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, which you find on that other phone. No wonder the processing and gaming weren't a problem for me with this device. I played my go-to mobile games, which might not be the best, but PUBG, Call of Duty Mobile, and Asphalt 9, and I can assure you that it was a smooth experience with about 60 FPS for my gaming experience. One thing I did notice while gaming, by the way, was that the Phantom X2 Pro did get reasonably hotter than other devices around this price point for me in terms of my gaming actually. I actually don't know if it's a processor issue or the material used for the rear of this smartphone, but that is there, and heating isn't something you want to put your smartphone through all the time. Not only does heating throttle the CPU performance at that instance, it also would lead to degradation of the battery life on your smartphone. In terms of the Android skin, you get iOS version 12, which is also a skin on top of Android 12 for the TECNO Phantom X2 Pro. iOS over the years have improved in their UI, but they are not perfect, especially considering the fact that you have to battle with a lot of bloatware applications and the ton of ads that keep bombarding your notification. I honestly thought that for a smartphone that retails at the price of 470,000 naira, TECNO could have limited the amount of ads their premium customers get to see. People who purchase this device are definitely going to be die-hard TECNO fans. The UI isn't all doom and gloom, there are sunshines and rainbows also. The little things that might not mean much to a lot of people actually do matter to me here, and iOS has some of those on lockdown too. For instance, when you swipe down the control center, you see icon toggles for different purposes. Now you can do a second swipe to reveal the names describing these icons. Let's talk about the messaging app on here, which has a notification message subsection where all the messages from your OTPs, banking, marketing all go into, without having to litter your inbox with those. That's actually thoughtful. The personalization section from the setting is also another aspect I did play with a ton, and I also did think it was great. You can set your normal swipe, which normally will open your app drawer, into showing your notification. Now, it's not even limited to just that. You can use it for a shortcut to launch any application on your smartphone and a whole lot more. In fact, there are a ton of gestures and modifications you can have done on your TECNO Phantom X2 Pro, making this smartphone one of the most you can customize to your taste next to MIUI. I actually do think you should play with the customization settings on this smartphone. There are a ton of these little things littered across iOS, making it one of the fastest improved UIs for smartphones in my opinion. I know you might be thinking there might be a problem. The problem most of us tend to get with TECNO devices as far as the software would go would be in terms of the software updates we get with these devices. TECNO hasn't been known for a lot of major software updates into the future, but this time we are promised at least 2 years of major OS updates, meaning you're going to get up to Android 14, and also 3 years of security updates for the TECNO Phantom X2 Pro. This sounds like a major win for the brand, and fingers crossed we get to see those over the years. Another problem might be that I noticed something about the smartphone when I searched for Netflix on the Play Store. I couldn't find it. Of course, I knew the smartphone was capable of running that application, and so I decided to sideload the application, and it worked perfectly fine. So for now, you might have to go to an APK store. I might have one linked in the description box below to download and use Netflix on this device. I'm kind of convinced that before the smartphone gets into the hands of the users, there might have been an update to fix that, as it's not a hardware limitation thing. Now, getting to the camera side of things, you might have seen the marketing hype around the mechanical moving parts for the camera here, and that's for the zoom lens, which comes out and retracts when not in use. Also, when your hand touches the zoom lens when it's out, it presses itself back in and gives you a prompt about that. One thing I would have loved to see about this retractable lens would have been a zoom in animation when you switch from the 50 megapixel main sensor back to the retractable 50 megapixel telephoto lens. You know, when using a real-world camera, when you try to zoom in, for those lenses that move physically to zoom, you can see the footage crop in while the zoom happens. That would have had a sick, slick move for the smartphone, and in fact, that's something that can be thrown in through a software update, TECNO Alpha. But then, give me some flashy things like these are not the reason we get to see these cameras here, and we want to talk about the performance on this camera, and man, does it deliver. I took photos with my iPhone 14 Pro and the X2 Pro here, and I did get confused at some points checking out some rare photos from the smartphone, and they were that good. This is pretty much the first time I'm putting a Tecno phone against a top-tier flagship device that costs more than double the price, and it actually does deliver well in terms of the rare cameras. Dynamic range was quite good on this one, colors are really vibrant, and you can see a lot of work was put into this smartphone's camera. Now the same thing repeats itself when you take night photos. They are not as noisy as you would expect for this kind of device, and they give you this clean looking photos. Switching over to the portrait mode automatically engages the retractable top telephoto lens to give you these images that have a little bit of blurred depth of field effect. There's also a document mode in the camera app, and from my test, it feels as though it uses AI to further sharpen the text on documents after the photos have been taken. The difference between the colors from the wide and the telephoto lens is quite small, and the only major difference I did notice was that the telephoto lens tends to have more blur to some objects, which is opposite to what I expected considering that the main lens had the bigger sensor. And also, it gives you a look that feels more like a digital zoom thing going on in the background. Where things are not so good is when you consider the 30 megapixel ultra-wide sensor at the rear of this camera. Also, we begin to get a slight difference in the front-facing camera of this smartphone. I'm not saying that the front-facing camera is the worst out there, but when compared to the photos from the rear camera of this smartphone, there's clearly a difference you get to see. In as much as the 32 megapixel sensor for the front-facing camera gives you really good dynamic range, you know, good colors and contrast, it doesn't do as great a job as what you get from the rear cameras. Now, this is the same thing with most other smartphone manufacturers out there, but the closer you get your front-facing camera to the rear one, the higher chance of being separated from the pack and being called a top-tier smartphone camera device. Videos can be recorded at a max resolution of 4K 60 FPS for the rear cameras and 1080p 60 FPS for the front-facing camera. Now, they are quite good for the camera, although you're not getting the iPhone comparable type of video on the smartphone like you could compare in the photo department. Now, there is general video stabilization up to 4K 30 FPS, meaning the ultra steady feature isn't available if you intend shooting videos at 4K 60 FPS. As far as the battery life, with the 5160 mAh battery, it gives you a decent experience. I consistently got a little above 6 hours screen on time every day on the smartphone. Now, because you have a bright 120Hz display and with intense use, you're somewhat expected to charge the Phantom X2 Pro at the end of the day. I noticed getting around 30% left from around 5 to 6 p.m. daily, maybe because I gamed a little too much on this smartphone than my typical smartphone use. Tecno tried to put some battery life saving features in place. For instance, there's a smart 5G toggle to help conserve your battery life when there is no 5G network, instead of constantly searching for that. You also get a 45-watt charger included within the box, which can quickly charge your smartphone in about an hour. So my general thoughts on the smartphone. This is a super smartphone from Tecno, if not the best they have to date. Design-wise, this is polarizing. For me, it's something I can always mess with, I love it, but for some others, they might not just want the curved display or slim form factor, so that's up to you in terms of the design. But as far as the processing goes on here, this is a beast. Cameras are quite on point, though the front-facing camera doesn't give you the same quality as the rear camera on the smartphone, which is pretty much normal. But Tecno might be able to fix that or give an improvement with a software update. And also, the speakers and microphone here are not the best there are for around this price point. But honestly speaking, if most people want a smartphone for around 470,000 naira, roughly $600, they might want to look in this direction, since you get future updates, good camera, good processing on the smartphone, and fingers crossed, Tecno gets to keep their promise of future updates. I can see a hardcore Tecno fan getting the smartphone and keeping it for a long time, considering the fact that this is a super good looking and performing smartphone. And guys, use this video to decide if the merits are convincing enough to get the smartphone, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section as you hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Cuídate.